My child, listen to this voice inside the silence of your mind, because tonight the city is not sleeping, and neither are the ghosts that walk within it, and neither are the wounds that have never healed. You do not hear sirens outside, but you can feel them echoing somewhere in the distance, like a memory you are trying not to remember. There is a street drowned in shadows, and there is a heart drowning in something much darker. This is not just a story of crime, this is the kind of story that crawls beneath the skin and refuses to leave. Somewhere in this city, there is a man who once believed in goodness and trust, and promises, but life does not always reward faith. Sometimes it crushes it. Sometimes it tears it apart slowly, so silently that by the time you realize it, you are already broken. He used to wake up believing tomorrow would heal what today damaged, but tomorrow never came the way he hoped. Instead, the city gave him betrayal from the people who smiled at him the most. It gave him wounds not on his skin, but in his soul. And one night, everything changed. One night, the city stopped being a place and became a trap. There was rain falling that night, not hard enough to drown the sound of footsteps, but heavy enough to blur the truth. He stood alone under the streetlight with a heart that wanted justice and hands that had never learned cruelty. He did not know that someone was already watching him, someone who memorized his kindness, not to love him, but to destroy him. There are people who do not stab with knives, they stab with lies. They stab with manipulation. They stab with sweetness that turns to poison. And he became their target. They framed him for something that shattered every last piece of his name. Overnight, he became a suspect, a villain, a shadow people whispered about. The world did not ask if he was innocent. The world simply decided he was guilty because guilt is easier to believe than truth. His friends disappeared. His trust collapsed. And the law that promised protection wrapped chains around his life. But what they did not know was that someone else was watching too. A presence that walks where human eyes cannot see. A voice that speaks when the world silences you. He fell to the ground that night, not because he was weak, but because everything he ever believed was falling apart. And when the city looked away, the heavens did not. In that deep darkness, when he thought he was utterly alone, something whispered inside him that this was not his end. The crime that crushed him would not define him. The lies would not own him. The shadows would not swallow him forever. For every injustice, there is a judge greater than any court built by hands. For every trap laid by wickedness, there is a path carved by something higher. They dragged him into long nights of interrogation with eyes full of suspicion, with words designed to break his spirit. They tried to corner him emotionally, mentally, morally. They wanted fear in his tone. They wanted defeat in his posture. They wanted confession from a soul that had done no wrong. And yet, he did not shatter completely because somewhere deep within him, he felt a strength that was not from him. He remembered every moment he chose kindness when cruelty would have been easier. Every time he forgave instead of destroying. Every time he loved, even when he was bleeding. And it was as if fate whispered, "You are not being punished. You are being proven. You are being shaped. You are being prepared." Meanwhile, the real darkness walked freely outside. The people who framed him smiled in daylight and planned in night. They sat in comfort while his life burned. They thought they had won. They thought they had buried him beneath lies so deep no truth could dig him out. But there are things unseen in this world. There is justice that rises slowly but powerfully, There is truth that sharpens itself in silence. And while they plotted, their pride grew, and pride always walks toward its own destruction. Days turned into nights, and nights turned into questions that refused to be answered. He felt abandoned by everyone, yet strangely protected by something invisible. When he closed his eyes, he could almost feel a voice telling him, "Hold on." When he wanted to scream, he could almost hear, "Do not break." When he thought, "This is the end," something whispered, "This is only a turning point." The city still walked past him like he was nothing, but fate was not done with him. Fate was only beginning. Because crime stories are not only about blood and violence. Sometimes the greatest crime is betrayal. Sometimes the deepest murder is the murder of trust. And sometimes the most dangerous criminals are those who hide behind perfection while poisoning innocence. But the thing about darkness is this: it always believes it will win, and it always forgets that light does not need applause to exist. It does not need permission to rise. It simply waits, and then it appears. And slowly evidence began to whisper where loud voices refused to speak. Little cracks formed in the lies. Secrets that were hidden began trembling. People who thought they could control everything began losing control, piece by piece. Their confidence started shaking, because truth has patience, and patience always outlives deception. The investigation that once hunted him began turning around without warning, like a storm changing direction. Silence had been collecting proof. Time had been preparing revelation. But before truth could free him, he had to face something more terrifying than accusation: himself. The anger inside him, the bitterness pressing against his chest, the desire to become like those who hurt him. He stood on the edge of becoming something he was never meant to be. Revenge called his name. Hate offered comfort. Darkness welcomed him like a home. And in that moment he had to choose: to become the monster they painted him as, or remain the soul he was created to be. And somewhere deep within him, that unseen voice whispered again, "Do not let their evil write your story." He chose to endure. He chose to stand, even when he was breaking. He chose not to lose himself. And that choice became the key he never knew he was holding. Because the deeper the storm, the greater the calm waiting beyond it. And his calm was coming, slowly, powerfully, undeniably. This is where his journey begins, not where it ends. Because what is coming will shake those who tried to destroy him. What is coming will expose every hidden hand. What is coming will prove that sometimes the quietest heart becomes the loudest victory. And the city that once watched him fall will soon witness something they never expected. The city still breathed like a restless beast, and the night refused to sleep. Somewhere far from the noise and the whispers, something powerful had begun to shift. Truth was no longer silent. It was awake. It was moving. And those who once walked proudly in deception could feel a shadow chasing them now. Not a shadow of fear alone, but a shadow of consequence. Because every hidden action writes its own confession, even when the lips remain closed. He stepped out of that darkness, not free yet, but no longer defeated. The world still doubted him, but his heart no longer bowed to their judgment. He had learned something in the silence, something that could not be taught in calm seasons. Pain had carved strength into him. Betrayal had sharpened his vision. Loneliness had forced him to listen to the quiet truth inside his spirit. And now he walked with a calm they could not understand. A calm born not from victory, but from rising again after everything tried to bury him. The streets he once trusted now felt like witnesses. Every corner remembered his grief. Every silent alley carried echoes of his broken breaths. But there was something different now. Where fear once lived, determination now stood. Where doubt once screamed resolve, now whispered patiently. He walked slowly, as if the ground beneath him knew a storm was coming, and even the city held its breath. Behind closed doors, those who framed him gathered with uneasy smiles. They spoke softly, but their hearts raced. Their hands trembled under invisible weight. They had thought evil was clever. They had believed their lies would live forever. They had underestimated the kind of truth that grows in silence, like a slow burning fire spreading unseen until it surrounds everything. They laughed to hide their fear. They planned once more to secure their false victory. Yet deep inside them, something had begun to crack. And somewhere, an investigator whose eyes were trained to see what others ignore began to feel a strange pull toward the case. It was supposed to be finished. It was supposed to be clear. But there are cases that refuse to sleep because innocence never stops whispering. The investigator could not explain why doubt had suddenly become louder than certainty. Maybe it was a detail overlooked. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was something far greater than human logic, moving quietly between events, guiding every step. More questions began to rise. Why did the story built against him feel too perfect, like a painting drawn to hide something beneath it? Why did every accusation sound rehearsed, like lines memorized before being spoken? Why did every witness look confident on the surface, but restless behind their eyes? Slowly, the illusion began to tremble. He meanwhile lived between hope and exhaustion. Some days, courage lit his soul. Some days, the weight tried to drown him. But there was no turning back now. He had walked too far through fire to surrender in the smoke. Nights still haunted him with memories of betrayal, yet those same nights also reminded him that he had survived what should have broken him completely. He breathed deeply, and each breath sounded like a promise to himself that he would not let darkness rewrite his life. There was a day when a faint spark of truth appeared unexpectedly, a careless word spoken in fear, a contradiction hidden in conversation, a trace of panic in a voice that once sounded confident. The investigator caught it. He held it quietly, like a fragile thread of light. He did not speak loudly. He did not shout discovery. Instead, he followed the thread patiently deeper and deeper until it began to reveal a hidden web. The same web that once trapped an innocent soul now began to wrap itself around the guilty. Those who built lies started to crumble inside themselves. They avoided mirrors because mirrors no longer reflected pride. They avoided silence because silence spoke too loudly. They avoided each other because they could feel blame growing like a storm between them. The city streets still looked peaceful, yet beneath the calm tension coiled like a serpent waiting to strike. He felt it too, not fully, not clearly, but in his heartbeat, in the air around him. As if destiny had begun to move faster, as if something unseen had finally decided enough. He did not smile yet. He did not celebrate. He only stood a little straighter than before. His eyes carried hope. Now, not loud hope, but strong, quiet hope that refuses to die even in darkness. Truth does not always arrive with noise. Sometimes it comes like a slow dawn, spreading across a cold sky, until suddenly everything that once hid in darkness cannot hide anymore. Step by step, hidden messages surfaced. Conversations once believed to be private found their way to light. Evidence buried with care began to breathe again. The case that once condemned him now turned like a powerful tide, no longer crushing him, but lifting him upward. The investigator felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with a burning sense of responsibility. Innocence must be restored. Justice had to breathe. He could no longer look at the accused man as a villain. He began to see a human being standing against a storm, not with power, not with influence, but with unbreakable endurance. And that changed everything. Those who plotted his destruction sensed danger approaching. Panic became their uninvited companion. They spoke of escape. They blamed each other. They searched desperately for control, but control had slipped away quietly long ago on the night they chose deceit over truth. Their empire of lies began to collapse, not from outside force, but from the cracks forming inside their own souls. He, however, stood in silence, watching the horizon of his life shift slowly. He did not wish for revenge anymore. The storm inside him had calmed. What he wanted now was truth, not to humiliate them, not to destroy them, but to reclaim himself, to hold his name again without shame, to breathe freely, to feel life without chains wrapped around his identity. And then the moment approached like thunder, hiding inside quiet clouds. The city still moved like any normal day. People walked, cars passed, life pretended everything was ordinary. Yet somewhere deep beneath that ordinary surface, destiny prepared to reveal what had long been hidden. Papers moved across tables. Voices spoke where silence once ruled. Truth was no longer a whisper. It was becoming a roar. When the world that once accused him was forced to face the truth, it did not know where to look. Those who judged him fell silent. Those who left him alone struggled to meet his gaze. Those who destroyed him were now bound by their own actions. And the city that once watched him fall now had to witness him rise, not through violence, not through hate, but through relentless truth. He walked out, not as the broken man they expected, but as someone transformed by hardship. Pain had not turned him bitter. Injustice had not turned him cruel. Instead, it had carved a deeper strength within him, a strength born from surviving what should have ended him. His story did not become a tale of vengeance. It became a testament that sometimes the strongest victory is simply standing when everything tried to make you fall forever. The darkness that once seemed unbreakable finally bowed. The lies that once shouted now trembled into silence. And the man who once stood alone beneath a cold streetlight with nothing but heartbreak now stood with dignity, untouched by the poison that tried to destroy him. He did not need applause. He did not need the world to kneel before his pain. All he needed was his truth restored and his soul unburdened. The city returned to its restless breathing, but something had changed forever. Somewhere justice had proven that it may walk slowly, but it never stops walking. Somewhere a heart that once shattered now carried unshakable strength. And somewhere, those who believed evil always wins now understood that hidden eyes always see and silent truth always rises. His story does not fade into darkness. It lingers like a reminder that even in the deepest crime of betrayal, there is a power greater than cruelty, a power that waits, watches, and then moves with unstoppable force. A power that lifts the innocent and exposes the wicked when the time is right. And as he walked forward into a life reborn, The night did not feel heavy anymore. The city did not feel like a trap. It felt like a stage where hope had quietly defeated darkness. This completes the second part with a fresh continuation. Deep emotional crime tone, no repeating thought flow, continuous English narrative as you asked. If you want it even darker or more cinematic or direct voiceover style for storytelling, I can tailor it further for your channel. The night no longer trembled with fear, but it still carried memories that refused to disappear. Even after justice rises, the shadows do not always leave immediately. They hover quietly, testing whether the spirit that survived can continue to stand tall. The city moved like it always had, yet something deeper stirred within it, as if it remembered everything that had happened and could never return fully to innocence. The streets seemed to whisper his name, not in accusation anymore, but in quiet respect, because they had watched a man walk through fire and come out still human. Freedom felt strange to him at first. When chains fall, the skin still remembers their weight. When silence breaks, the ears still expect pain. He walked through places he once avoided and breathed air that finally felt like it belonged to him again. But freedom is not only the absence of injustice, it is the rediscovery of self. And he was only beginning to understand what he had become after everything. There were people who came to him with soft voices now, people who once doubted, people who once stood aside when he needed them most. They spoke words meant to heal, but words do not erase scars. He listened quietly, not out of anger, but out of wisdom, because he had learned that trust is not built by sound, it is built by actions and time. Some asked for forgiveness. Some simply watched him with guilt heavy in their eyes. He did not hate them. Hate would have chained him again. Instead, he chose something stronger. He chose to walk past bitterness without letting it follow him. Yet even as life began to rebuild itself, the story was not finished, because the city had begun to see something it once ignored. It realized how easy it was to believe lies, how quickly innocence can be buried beneath noise. It realized how fragile justice can be when pride and deception hold power. And somewhere deep within the system, a quiet determination began to grow. There would be questions now. There would be changes. His case was no longer just his. It became a mirror held in front of a society that pretended to be certain while often being blind. Meanwhile, the ones who had built the lies lived with consequences far more terrifying than punishment. They lived with themselves. Pride had been shattered. Confidence had collapsed. The masks they once wore had cracked beyond repair. They could no longer hide behind charm because the world had seen what lived beneath it. Some tried to justify their actions, even to themselves, but truth has a way of haunting those who betray it. Their nights were no longer peaceful. Their futures no longer felt secure. The darkness they created had turned around and chosen them as its new prisoners. He did not chase them. He did not follow their downfall with satisfaction. He had let go of vengeance long ago. But every step he took forward was a reminder that they could not break what they never created. His worth had never belonged to them. His identity had never been in their hands. Their lies had tried to define him, but truth reclaimed him completely. There came a day when he stood once again under an open sky, where years ago everything inside him had shattered. The wind touched his face softly, as if apologizing for everything the world had done. The city noise softened like distant waves. He closed his eyes not to escape reality, but to embrace it fully for the first time in a long while. His chest rose with a breath that did not tremble. His heart beat with strength, not desperation. This was not the man who once knelt in despair. This was the man who had walked through betrayal, doubt, isolation, and fear, and discovered himself stronger on the other side. But his story did not end with survival. Survival is only the beginning of a greater journey. Pain had given him understanding. Injustice had given him empathy. Loneliness had taught him how deeply human hearts can break without anyone noticing. He saw the world differently now. He saw the quiet suffering people carry. He saw how quickly society judges and how slowly it apologizes. He saw how fragile trust is and how sacred truth must become. And so, instead of hiding from the world, he stepped into it with purpose. He chose to stand for those who could not speak. He chose to stand beside those who were unheard. His voice no longer belonged only to him. It belonged to every soul who had ever been crushed under the weight of falsehood. It belonged to every heart that had ever been framed by lies and left to drown. He did not become a warrior of violence. He became a guardian of truth. Quiet, determined, uncompromising. People began to hear his story not as a scandal, but as a lesson. Some were inspired. Some were shaken. Some were humbled. Because his life had become proof that justice may walk slowly, but it does not forget its path. It became proof that a person can break without being destroyed. It became proof that darkness does not win when a heart refuses to surrender. The investigator who once doubted him found himself changed as well. The case had not only reopened justice, it had reopened conscience. He carried a deeper sense of duty now, not as a job, but as a calling. He understood that every decision holds a life inside it. Every signature carries a destiny. And because of this one story, he vowed never again to let certainty silence truth. There were still whispers in the city. There always will be. Human hearts will always wrestle with pride, fear, selfishness, and doubt. But somewhere among those whispers lives his journey, a quiet reminder carved into the unseen corners of the city, saying, "Do not rush to judge, do not bury innocence, do not underestimate the strength hidden inside a wounded soul." As for him, he no longer feared the night. He no longer saw darkness as an enemy, but as something he had already walked through and conquered. The same streets that once crushed him now felt like witnesses of his rise. The same sky that once watched him fall now seemed to honor his resilience. He carried scars, but they no longer hurt. They spoke. They told a story of a human spirit that refused to surrender even when the world turned against it. He walked forward without hesitation, not running, not hiding, just walking with steady, quiet strength. His past no longer chained him. His future no longer frightened him. And his present finally belonged to him completely. The city breathed. The night softened. And somewhere unseen, justice smiled, knowing it had not arrived too late. This is how his story continues, not as a tale of suffering, but as a living proof that even when the world pushes you to the edge, there is a deeper power that lifts you back from it. A power born not from anger, but from courage. Not from hate, but from endurance. Not from darkness, but from a light that refuses to die. His journey will always stand as a reminder that truth does not need to shout to win. It only needs to endure. And he endured. And he rose. And he became more than what anyone ever expected. If you want part 4, even deeper and darker, like a new case starting from here, or turning it into a full cinematic series.